He was a Navy SEAL, a shadow stationed deep in the frozen blue mountains on a covert mission the world would never know. Snow, wind, and duty were his only constants. Nothing ever changed until the blizzard arrived. And through the storm, a faint, broken bark. When he tore open the cabin door, a wounded German shepherd collapsed over the threshold, a little girl strapped to his back, half frozen and barely breathing. He thought it was a simple act of rescue. He didn't know the loyal dog was carrying a secret that would drag him into a deadly truth buried deep beneath the snow. Before our story unfolds, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if this journey touches your heart, please subscribe so you never miss another tale of loyalty, courage, and the bonds that can't be broken. Your support truly means everything to us. Snow fell against the mountains like a shifting white curtain, muting the entire world into a breathless, silent hush. Inside a lone wooden cabin nearly buried deep in Oregon's Blue Mountains Navy SEAL, Caleb Hayes sat before a desk crowded with encrypted radios, a high-gain antenna monitor, and a ruggedized laptop humming under a dim amber light. At 37, Caleb had the look of a man carved from hardship and resolve. Broad shoulders, a solid posture, short, dark brown hair maintained in strict military fashion, and a jawline defined by a trimmed utilitarian stubble. His eyes, steel blue and unwavering, held a depth that spoke of discipline forged by loss, not just by years. To most, the Blue Mountains were an empty wilderness. To him, they were his listening post. Caleb's assignment was simple in its description, but impossibly demanding in its execution: monitor encrypted communications along the I-84 corridor for any sign that Silverline, a ruthless criminal network specializing in elder fraud and sabotaging emergency systems, was preparing to strike. They had already tested false 911 rerouting in 2 counties. Someone had to intercept their next move. The FBI was handling the analysis. The U.S. Marshals were securing the witnesses. Caleb's duty was to sit alone in the piercing cold, sifting through the noise, and detect the faintest tremor of danger before it could reach innocent people. Most SEALs couldn't stand the stillness. Caleb had learned to live in it. Some missions strip all sound away until the silence becomes a kind of harsh, clarifying medicine. He leaned back, stretching the deep tension from his shoulders. The cabin felt smaller tonight, the wind clawing at its shutters like an impatient specter. The blizzard had descended hours earlier than any forecast had predicted, swallowing the mountains in thick, blinding sheets of white. Caleb adjusted his headset, listening to the low drone of frequencies fighting through the storm. Nothing out of the ordinary, just static. Endless static. And then a sound that was not static at all. A bark, thin, broken, barely a thread against the roar of the wind. Caleb froze, every nerve electrified with that instinct only a seasoned operator ever knows. Most people hear danger too late. SEALs hear it coming. Another bark closer this time, and filled with frantic urgency. Caleb was on his feet, grabbing his thermal jacket from the hook beside the door. His movements were swift, economical, a dance of muscle memory born from missions where hesitation meant death. He wrenched the door open. The wind slammed into him like a wall of ice and needles. And then he saw him. A German shepherd staggering through the swirling chaos, his fur matted with frost, his steps lurching with the heavy weight of something precious on his back. The dog finally collapsed onto the threshold, his chest heaving, his powerful legs trembling with utter exhaustion. A tiny girl, barely 2 years old, was lashed to its back with a tattered strip of seatbelt. Her pale pink coat was ripped, her cheeks an unearthly blue, her eyelashes sealed shut with ice. Even lost to the world, her small hands were buried deep in the dog's fur. A desperate grip on the last bit of warmth in her frozen world. The air froze in Caleb's lungs, not with fear, but an electric jolt of focus so intense it hurt. The dog fought to raise its head, its warm brown eyes clouded over with an immense weariness, locked with Caleb's in a silent, desperate plea. And then its strength gave out, collapsing completely, its right leg stained with dark, nearly frozen blood. Easy now. I've got you. Caleb whispered, his voice a calm anchor against the bitter cold that knifed through the open door. He gathered the little girl into his arms first. She was terrifyingly light, as if the cold had whittled her down to a mere outline of a child. Caleb cradled her against his chest, enclosing her tiny hands within his own gloved one, turning to shield her face from the biting wind. A fragile, brittle whimper escaped her lips. She was alive, but barely. Inside, he gently placed her on his cot, carefully removing her ice-caked outerwear, and swaddled her in the thermal blanket. He checked her airway, her pulse, her pupils, his movements fluid and practiced, decisive. Years of battlefield medicine moved through him, guiding his hands. He slid a heating pad beneath her back, briskly rubbing her arms to bring life back to them, then cocooned her under his own heavy jacket, sharing his body heat. Then it was the dog's turn. The shepherd was down its sides, heaving in shallow, agonizing breaths. A big animal, easily 80 pounds, its thick black and tan coat was matted with ice. He looked to be 5 or 6 years old, powerful, devoted, the kind of dog whose training held fast, even when the world itself fell apart. Caleb knelt by his side. "You did good, boy." He gently cut away the matted fur from around the wound, bathing it with warm, antiseptic water before applying a pressure bandage with an expert's precision. The dog never fought him. It endured the pain with a soldier's resolve, its gaze flickering towards the child on the cot. Something shifted deep inside Caleb. A loyalty this profound wasn't just instinct. It was forged in love, in training, in unbreakable trust. He slid a folded blanket under the shepherd and fired up the old cast-iron stove, feeding it log after log until the small cabin was filled with a steady, life-giving warmth. The next few hours became a blur of checking vitals, of adjusting blankets and preparing warm sugar water for the moment the little girl might stir. Outside, the blizzard raged, but within these 4 walls a fragile life was painstakingly piecing itself back together. Then, in the quiet moments before dawn, the little girl let out a soft, sleeping sigh. A touch of color returned to her face. The dog's breathing finally deepened, losing its panicked edge. But even then, Caleb felt it, a cold knot of unease tightening deep in his gut. A child and a trained dog don't just materialize in a blizzard for no reason. Something had to be out there, something that had chased them through the blinding storm right to his doorstep. He looked from the child to the dog, and for the first time in months, he felt his own mission shift. The storm finally broke into a brittle gray morning, a dawn where the world seemed half awake and still half frozen. Inside the cabin, the stove crackled its gentle warmth, a fragile shield, against the cold that clung to the windows like a painter's frost. Caleb Hayes kept his vigil sitting on the edge of his cot, watching the steady rise and fall of the little girl's chest. A soft pink had returned to Emma's cheeks, chasing away the terrifying, ghost-like blue from hours before. He drew near as her eyelids trembled, her soft hazel eyes glazed with a daze of confusion, opening just long enough for a faint, desperate whisper to escape. Crash. Mommy. Daddy. The words were shattered pieces of a nightmare, striking him harder than the blizzard's bite. Before he could utter a sound, Emma's eyes fluttered closed once more, her small hand loosening its grip on his jacket. A heavy breath left Caleb's lips. He'd witnessed the face of trauma in countless forms, on soldiers, on civilians, and entire communities ripped apart by conflict. But the sheer vulnerability in a child's voice, whispering from the very precipice of life, burrowed deeper into his soul than any memory of war. Near the warmth of the stove, Max struggled to his feet, his legs still weak and trembling. The German shepherd's deep, black and tan coat was still slick with melted snow, the fur around his wounded leg stiff with dried antiseptic. But his gaze was now fiercely intelligent, burning with an unwavering focus. He moved restlessly between the door and the window, his tail rigid, his body low to the ground, emitting soft, urgent whines. "Take it easy, boy," Caleb soothed. "You got her this far. I know your work isn't finished." Max pressed his nose to the crack in the shutters, a low growl rumbling in his chest at something only he perceived. A cold knot formed in the pit of Caleb's stomach. Whatever drove this heroic dog through the blizzard was still out there. Rising to his feet, he snatched his handheld radio and cycled through channels until the static cleared just enough to send a call. "Olivia Park, this is Hayes. You read me?" After a tense pause, a voice crackled back. "Loud and clear. I'm just about in range. Give me the go-ahead." A wave of profound relief washed over him. Olivia Park was a former Army combat medic, now a search and rescue specialist for the U.S. Forest Service. At 31, she possessed the unshakable calm of someone who'd stared death in the face and pulled life back time and again. She was tall, forged lean by years in the unforgiving wilderness, with a warm copper complexion and dark hair typically pulled back in a practical braid. Her brown eyes held a rare mix of surgical precision and deep empathy. These were traits sharpened in the chaos of field hospitals and the solitude of mountain rescues. Caleb relayed her the coordinates. 3 to 4 miles north. Girl's hypothermic, but she's stable. Dog's injured. I could really use your help." "I'm on foot." Olivia's voice returned. "Snow's too deep for any vehicle. Give me just over an hour." True to her word, about an hour and a half later, considering the heavy snowpack and brutal terrain, Caleb heard the distinct sound of boots crunching outside. He pulled the door open, and there was Olivia clad in a forest green rescue jacket, layered with frost. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, her cheeks reddened by the trek. But her gaze was sharp with an unshakable purpose. "Let me see the girl," she stated, her voice calm, as she stepped over the threshold. Olivia moved with the fluid, certain grace of a seasoned professional. She knelt by Emma's side, checking her core temperature, her pulse the color of her small fingertips, and carefully coaxed sips of a warm electrolyte drink past her lips. When Max limped toward her, she offered the brave dog a knowing nod. "Well, now you're some kind of miracle, aren't you?" she murmured, gently examining his wound. "You carried her through that whole ordeal." Max's tail gave a single, weak thump before he turned his attention back to the window, staring out into the darkness as if the wild was calling him to finish what he started. Olivia met Caleb's eyes. "He's agitated. He wants to go back. I know." Caleb began pulling on his heavy outer gear, cinching his vest and confirming his sidearm was secure. "And I know," he said, his voice low. "Whatever happened out there, it's not over." Olivia's gaze held his, reading the truth he couldn't speak. "You're going back out there," she stated. Caleb gave a solemn nod. "Stay with Emma. Keep the fire going. Radio me every 10 minutes." "I will." She placed a protective hand on Emma's blanket. "Go." Max was already at the door, his muscles taut, ignoring his own wound. Caleb grabbed his pack, a blur of practiced motion first aid kit rope rations, a spare magazine, his knife a thermal flare, and slung it over his shoulder. He stepped into the biting chill of the pale morning. "Lead on, Max." The dog surged forward, not with speed, but with an unwavering, deliberate resolve, his limp a mark of his courage weaving through the drifts, as if following an invisible lifeline back into the heart of the storm. They descended the slope through groves of pines bowed heavy with the night snow, and over ridges where the wind had carved the drifts into sharp, unforgiving edges. Caleb matched his pace, deciphering every sound the wilderness offered, the sharp crack of settling ice, the low moan of the distant wind, and a faint, heavy echo. He couldn't quite place something that felt deeply wrong. The mountains were unnervingly still, as if holding their breath. Halfway down a rise, Max froze his ears, locking into place. A low, threatening growl rumbled from the depths of his chest. "What is it, boy?" Caleb whispered. Max turned his head toward the dark heart of the woods, his gaze fixed on something only he could sense. Then let out a single sharp bark, a clear warning before plunging forward. Caleb pushed after him, branches lashing at his face, snow erupting with every step. Suddenly the forest gave way to a narrow ravine, and far below lay a dark, mangled shape that sent a chill straight to his soul. A vehicle, the SUV, crushed and half swallowed by snow and shattered trees. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with the sudden, chilling clarity of what this all meant. Emma's words weren't delirium. There had been a crash, and if this heroic dog had pulled her from that wreckage, then someone else could still be out here. Caleb moved to the precipice, the soft hiss of snow the only sound as he stared down into the mangled abyss, gripped by the undeniable certainty that this nightmare was only just beginning. The wind seemed to die as Caleb and Max descended the slope, but the cold remained a palpable presence that clung to the air like a final warning. Snow blanketed the branches in heavy, silent shrouds, muting every sound and transforming the world into a disorienting, pale maze. Caleb moved with purpose, his boots crunching through brittle layers of ice, his eyes sweeping the terrain with a cold precision born from years of navigating hostile territory. Max, however, led with an unwavering certainty, the German shepherd's injured leg, forcing a slight hitch in his gait, a testament to the fight he'd already endured. Yet his determination never once faltered. His nose hovered inches from the snow, tracing a story of fear, the sharp tang of gasoline, the cold smell of twisted metal, and beneath it all the unmistakable metallic scent of human blood. The ravine suddenly gaped below them. Caleb stopped at the top ridge, his breath catching in a single controlled exhale. Down below the black SUV was a mangled wreck at the base of the slope, half consumed by the pristine snow and the jagged splinters of shattered pines. Its frame was twisted as if a giant, wrathful hand had wrung it out like a cloth. He crouched, his mind instantly assessing the scene, not with panic, but with cold, hard calculation. Years of hard-won experience taught him that wreckage always tells a story if you know how to listen. Max's urgent bark shattered the silence as he bounded downhill. Caleb was right behind him. When he reached the vehicle, an icy certainty washed over him. This was no act of nature. The snow surrounding the SUV was marred by scorched, blackened patches, the unmistakable craters from small blasts that exposed charred metal near the tail end. Caleb swept away loose snow from the undercarriage. The charring was precise, contained the work of a shaped charge, a small explosive engineered not to destroy the vehicle, but to orchestrate disaster, severing control, shattering its balance, and plunge the truck over the cliff, a tragedy that would look like nothing more than a loss of control on the ice. Inside the mangled SUV, haunting traces of his family remained. A child's car seat hurled sideways, its harness brutally torn apart. A single pink mitten wedged beneath the console. A faint trail of blood leading from the shattered window out into the snow. His eyes found the frayed end of a seatbelt. The edges were shredded not by sheared metal, but by teeth. Max had chewed through it to pull Emma free. "Good boy," Caleb whispered, his voice thick. Max nudged toward a patch of snow just feet from the wreckage. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. There, etched in the snow, were the desperate drag marks of someone pulling themselves from the wreck on their elbows. The impressions left in the snow were uneven, a clear sign of injury. Beside them, thin smears of blood stained the white. But it was the footprints that stole Caleb's breath. 3 distinct sets of heavy boot prints. They were large, deep, and recent, far too fresh for any rescue crew, too methodical for hikers. Caleb's jaw locked. His gaze swept the tree line, his entire posture shifting from quiet investigation to coiled combat readiness. He reset the grip on his rifle, the movement subtle yet absolute. And then Max growled a deep rumble from his chest, a vibration that screamed danger long before Caleb heard a sound. Then muffled voices, tents closing in on their position. Caleb dropped behind a fallen log, his eyes narrowed to slits. Max was at his side, ears flat, his body trembling, not from fear, but with raw anticipation. 3 figures emerged from the other side of the ravine, They were kitted out for cold weather ops. Dark insulated jackets, tactical boots, and gloves made for a firm grip. Their faces were obscured by neck gaiters pulled high. But the one detail that mattered most was unmistakable. They were armed. The point man held an AR platform rifle at the ready, moving with the fluid confidence of a trained operator. He was tall and broad, the stubble on his jaw outlining the hard, angular lines of his face. His gaze swept the wreckage with a cold precision, as if confirming an absence of survivors he'd hoped for. The second man, shorter, was wiry, coiled with a nervous, twitchy energy. His eyes darted everywhere, the trees, the snow back to the shattered SUV, as if he expected an attack from the shadows at any second. The third, bulkier and more deliberate in his movements, had a weathered face bisected by a deep scar running from his temple to his jaw, a roadmap of violence and unfinished business. Caleb committed their faces to memory, a cold, automatic process. Details were intelligence, and intelligence was survival. The tall one spoke first. "Tracks show they got out? At least 2 of them." The wiry one's voice was tight when he answered. The boss wants this mess cleaned up by nightfall. The kid is the priority." A heavy silence fell, broken by the scarred man's low mutter. "Kid or not, if they're still breathing, we end it!" A deep, bone-chilling cold settled inside Caleb. These weren't amateurs. They were professionals sent to erase any survivors. He waited, holding his breath as the trio began to spread out, sweeping the perimeter. Max let out a single sharp bark, a warning. In that instant, Caleb moved, exploding from his cover. He slid behind a wider trunk. His first shot wasn't meant for flesh, a warning that hit the ground before the tall man. A deliberate warning intended to break their advance. "What in the hell?" the wiry man cried out in shock. Their reaction was immediate, perfectly coordinated. The scarred man fired bullets, shredding bark mere inches from Caleb's shoulder. Caleb rolled and returned fire, with short, controlled bursts forcing them to take cover. Max lunged as one man tried to flank, teeth bared for the man's gun arm. The man yelled, stumbling backward, firing wildly into the snow. Caleb seized the moment, shooting the weapon from his hand and sending it skidding on the ice. The tall man cursed. "Fall back now." A smoke canister landed with a thud in the snow, erupting in a thick, white cloud that mixed with the storm. In seconds, all 3 figures had vanished back into the woods. Their retreat was only a sound, pounding feet fading through the pines. Max growled low, then urgently sniffed the air. Caleb let his breath out in a slow cloud. The fight was brief, but it told him everything he had to know. These weren't just random hunters, they were finishers. He bent to check on Max. No new wounds, just adrenaline still shuddering through the dog's muscles. Then Max moved to the snowbank by the SUV and dug furiously. Caleb knelt beside him. Moments later, Max pulled out a small blue scarf smelling faintly of a child's shampoo and smoke. "Emma's." Caleb's hand tightened on the fabric. "Lead the way," he whispered. And Max did, bounding toward the deeper forest, toward whatever devastating truth lay beyond the broken ravine. Snow crunched softly underfoot as Caleb, Hayes, and Max pushed deeper, the ravine fading behind them like a wound closing beneath the falling snow. The forest grew dense pines leaning in like silent guardians of secrets. Max limped, but his pace never faltered, his breath pluming in determined white clouds. Caleb kept pace right beside his loyal friend, his senses pulled tight like a bowstring. They crossed a creek, frozen in motion, climbed a wind-scoured rise, and dropped into a sheltered hollow. It was there that Max stopped dead, his ears angled sharply forward, his nose quivering with discovery. Caleb followed his intense gaze. 2 figures lay half-buried beneath low fir boughs, a desperate attempt at shelter. A man and a woman alive, but just barely. Caleb approached with caution. The man began to stir first, groaning as he struggled to push himself up. He looked to be in his early 40s, sandy brown hair matted with sweat and snow. His face had the rugged handsomeness of an outdoorsman, with strong cheekbones and a jaw shadowed by uneven stubble, and deep lines carved by profound worry and exhaustion. His pale blue eyes flickered with agony, yet held the sharp alertness of a man refusing to surrender. The woman beside him was slighter, mid-30s. Long, dark blonde hair was tangled around her face like brittle winter grass. Her skin was ghostly pale from the shock, and freckles dotted her cheeks beneath streaks of grime and blood. Despite her fragile look, her expression held a quiet strength, the look of someone who had faced storms long before this one. She pressed a trembling hand against her left shoulder, which hung lower than her right in a way Caleb recognized instantly. A dislocation. "Daniel Turner?" Caleb asked softly. The man's eyes blinked open a faint nod. "My wife, Rachel." His voice broke raw from cold and thirst. Caleb's quick assessment revealed Daniel's fractured ribs. His breath was shallow, his torso held rigid. Rachel's shoulder was clearly dislocated, and a cut over her eyebrow was partially frozen shut with blood. They were both hypothermic, their clothes rigid with ice. Max nudged Rachel's hand gently, then sat at her side, unmoving. Caleb knelt. "I'm helping you, but we have to move now." With a single practiced motion, he reset Rachel's shoulder. She bit down hard on her lip, eyes squeezed shut against the pain, but made no sound, and her strength stunned him. He wrapped Daniel's chest with a compression bandage, stabilizing his broken ribs just enough for him to stand. He gave them heat packs, had them sip the little warm water he had, and then offered his extra pair of gloves. "Can you walk?" Caleb asked. Daniel rose slowly, wincing. "We'll make it. We have to." Caleb gave a firm nod, then slung Daniel's arm over his shoulder, leading them on. A quarter-mile north, a small, abandoned ranger cabin's silhouette appeared, half buried in snow, its roof sagging from the weight of past winters. The cabin itself felt ancient. Rough-hewn logs, frost lining the windows, whined, whistling through cracks. But it was a refuge from the storm. Inside, dust and a bitter cold greeted them like ghosts. The single room had a trap door in the floor, which Caleb instantly recognized as a cellar. It was small, dark and cramped, but hidden. "Sit," Caleb ordered gently. Daniel and Rachel sank to the floor, sharing a look that held a universe of fear, hope, and the fragile thread that still connected them. Caleb lit a lantern, its soft golden light washing over their faces. "Tell me exactly what happened." The pair shared a look, then Rachel spoke, her voice trembling, but also firm. "We work for Northbridge Care, an elder services company." She paused, swallowing hard. "I'm an audit supervisor. Daniel's in IT security." He leaned forward, wincing with the effort. 2 months ago, we found disturbing discrepancies in their Medicare billing. Charges for exams that never took place, hospice claims for people still living, even medical equipment billed to seniors who had died years before. Rachel's eyes blazed with a mix of fear and rage. Northbridge wasn't just inflating the bills. They were funneling the money through a massive laundering network. The name we heard whispered around the office was Silver Line. Daniel rubbed at his temples. "We gathered so much proof. We gave it all to the FBI. They set up a quiet transport with the U.S. Marshals. We weren't supposed to stop for anything, not even gas." Rachel shivered. "But somehow they still got to us. Someone on the inside must have known our route." "A deputy sheriff," Daniel muttered with disgust. He took the SUV to the station garage for a routine winter check. He must have planted the device on the axle then. Caleb's jaw tightened. "A directed blast. Small enough to hide, but strong enough to force you off the road." Rachel nodded, her tears finally falling. "We had to fight our way out of the SUV. Max pulled Emma free. After that, it's just cold and pain." Max whimpered softly in the lantern light, as if he was confirming her story. Caleb stood and pulled a satellite phone from his vest, and punched in a secure frequency. Static hissed in his ear before a sharp voice cut through. "Commander Rohr speaking." Caleb's posture instinctively straightened. "Sir, it's Hayes. I'm with 2 surviving witnesses in the Northbridge case. Their vehicle was eliminated with a shaped charge. Armed hostiles are on site now cleaning up." A heavy silence hung on the line before Rohr's voice turned to steel. Understood. This is larger than we anticipated. You are to hold your ground. Reinforcements are inbound ETA 3 hours. Yes, sir, Caleb confirmed. Hayes, Roar added, his voice dropping. His voice now a grave whisper. Those witnesses cannot be lost. The line went dead. In an instant, Caleb was a blur of focused motion. He wove fishing line with shards of metal and tiny sleigh bells from a storage chest, creating a network of makeshift alarms he strung between the frozen trees. He barricaded the windows with heavy firewood and loose stones, transforming the fragile cabin walls into a crude but solid defense against the coming storm. With a desperate urgency, he swept fresh snow over their tracks, erasing any trace of their path. Daniel and Rachel watched their faces a mask of awe and stark terror. Get into the cellar now, Caleb commanded softly. It's cramped, but it will keep you hidden. Rachel's hand found his arm, her grip tight with gratitude. Thank you. Daniel hesitated, his voice breaking. If something happens to us, Emma is the only thing that matters. Caleb met his desperate gaze with unwavering resolve. Nothing is going to happen to any of you. They descended into the cold darkness. Caleb sealed the hatch above them, concealing it perfectly, with a threadbare rug and an overturned chair. Max took his post by the door, every muscle coiled and tense despite the agony in his shoulder, his gaze locked on the menacing darkness beyond the glass. Caleb extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into absolute blackness. The forest seemed to lean in, suffocating them. Out there, the men from the ravine were regrouping, and the storm now, just a whisper, felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable violence to begin. Night fell like a shroud of black velvet over the mountains, devouring the last remnants of the day's fragile warmth. The woods surrounding the isolated ranger cabin felt like they were constricting, taking a silent, deep breath before a storm, not of weather, but of men. Caleb Hayes knelt behind the makeshift barricade of logs and stone. He'd built his rifle aimed toward the southern tree line, a silent sentinel against the dark. Max stood faithfully at his side, his body rigid and alert, the faint lantern light glinting off the matted, dried blood on his shoulder. The loyal dog's amber eyes darted from the oppressive forest to the concealed trapdoor, where he knew Daniel and Rachel were huddled below. An unnatural silence had blanketed the world, too heavy, too still. Then a distant sound sliced through the night, a chilling, purposeful howl. It wasn't a wolf, but the baying of a trained bloodhound, low and resonant with intent. It was answered by another, and then a third. Caleb's jaw clenched. They brought trackers, he whispered. A low growl rumbled deep in Max's chest. He knew the sound of hunting dogs. The shepherd moved forward protectively. He braced his wounded body as if by sheer will alone he could shield the cabin from the deep shadows beyond the first line of pines. Disembodied voices floated on the wind. Spread out. They're close. Watch the tree line. His alarms are still active. Hounds have the woman's scent and the man's blood. The cabin is just ahead. Caleb peered through his scope, watching the threat materialize. They emerged like a ripple of shadows from the darkness, 20 armed men fanning out in practiced, deadly formations. At their lead were 3 handlers. Each man clutched the leash of a massive bloodhound, a breed built for tracking in this brutal, unforgiving cold. One handler in particular stood out. He was a broad-shouldered man, with a shaved head and a fiery red beard, who moved with the chilling confidence of a man who had hunted other men before. His eyes were a flat, lifeless green, and a faded tattoo of a coiled rattlesnake snaked its way up his neck. Caleb didn't know his name, but he recognized the type instantly. Former military, dishonorably discharged a hired gun with no soul left to sell. Behind him, 2 younger handlers wrestled with their dogs, both gaunt men with sharp predatory features, vacant eyes, and the wired energy of those consumed by a chemical fire. Their words were a fast, erratic torrent, utterly devoid of discipline. It was a splintered crew, but that made them dangerous. Desperate men were always the most volatile. Caleb let out a slow, steady breath, centering himself as his SEAL training had ingrained in him. "Easy, boy," he whispered to Max. "Let them make the first move." He didn't have to wait long. A twig snapped just north of the cabin, a sound that cracked the silence like a whip. Caleb's rifle swung in a fluid arc, locking onto a gunman slinking forward. He was a stocky build, maybe in his mid-30s, bundled in a thick winter coat with a ski mask pulled down tight. His breath formed a ghost in the air as he leveled his pistol at the window. Caleb fired a single controlled shot. The man's pistol was torn from his hand with a metallic shriek, and he collapsed backward, screaming as he cradled his shattered wrist. Max's bark was a cannon shot, a defiant roar that echoed through the skeletal trees. The woods exploded into a symphony of violence. "SEAL, we've got a SEAL in the cabin, move suppressive fire." A hailstorm of bullets shredded the front wall, atomizing the wood and sending a rain of splinters across the room. Caleb rolled behind a beam just as rounds tore through the air where his head had been a second before. The air was a thick, choking cloud of dust and shredded bark, mingling with the oily smoke from the lantern. With a protective snarl, Max surged for the window, but Caleb's hand found his harness a firm anchor. "Not yet. Stay with me." The bloodhounds lunged forward, dragging their handlers so hard the men nearly fell. They began to circle the cabin, their noses pressed to the snow, their bays rising like mournful hunting horns across the frozen valley. Caleb unpinned a flashbang and lobbed it through the window. A blinding, deafening crack tore the night apart, followed by panicked yells. A handler crumpled, clawing at his eyes. One of the bloodhounds yelped, stunned but alive. The other two dogs, however, continued their manic search, their powerful noses driving them toward the cabin's rear entrance as gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets punched through the log walls, spilling insulation that drifted through the chaos like the last snowflakes of a dying winter. Caleb could hear Daniel's harsh breathing from below the trap door, his urgent whispers telling Rachel to stay down. It was a visceral reminder of what was truly at stake. He flowed from cover to cover, firing in disciplined bursts, each shot placed with lethal purpose, none of them wasted. One shadow fell near the eastern pines. Another dove behind a log, clutching a bleeding thigh. Beside him, Max, barking with pure fury, launched himself through the narrow gap in the barricade and slammed into a man trying to flank them. The shepherd's jaws clamped onto the attacker's sleeve, yanking him through the deep snow before the man kicked himself free and scrambled back into the all-consuming darkness. Then the world shook. A grenade skittered under the outer wall. "Down!" Caleb bellowed, grabbing Max and pulling him behind the thickest part of their shelter. The blast tore the wall open, turning logs into projectiles. A white-hot agony slashed across Caleb's ribs, shrapnel burying itself in his flesh. He gritted his teeth, the taste of iron flooding his mouth. Max staggered, a pained whine escaping him. A round had grazed his shoulder, carving a line of blood that darkened his thick fur. "Stay with me, boy." Caleb rasped, his voice raw with pain and desperation. Outside, their attackers were closing in. The red-bearded handler roared his command. "Finish it, he's wounded, push in now!" The gunmen surged their spirits, lifted by the sight of destruction. Their heavy footsteps pounded the snow, a drumbeat signaling the end was near. Their shadows crept through the shattered wall, inching closer. Caleb's strength was failing, blood seeping from his side. His magazine was almost spent. Max pressed against his leg, trembling but defiant. The dog looked up his eyes, silently asking what they would do. Caleb steadied his breath, his voice a raw whisper. 3 minutes. Just hold on for 3 more minutes. He didn't know if it was true, but he clung to the hope. Figures swarmed the doorway. Caleb fired the last precious rounds from his rifle, forcing them back. He dropped the spent rifle and drew his pistol, breathing through the searing pain. The forest erupted with light and sound, bullets, flashes, the furious howls of dogs. The cabin was splintering around them, barely standing. Then another sound ripped through the night. A deep percussive rhythm that vibrated up from the ground. Helicopter rotors. Powerful spotlights tore through the darkness, flooding the forest with blinding light as a voice boomed from above. "Drop your weapons. This is SEAL Team 6. Panic erupted among the assailants. Some fired blindly into the sky. Others scattered into the woods. A few fell to their knees in surrender as SEAL operators began fast roping from the hovering chopper. Dark figures moved with deadly efficiency, weapons leveled. A second chopper began circling the perimeter, cutting off all routes of escape. Snow billowed in the powerful downdraft. The entire battle was over in mere minutes. 10 men were pulled from the snow in restraints, some snarling, others whimpering. 10 more were being treated by medical teams, wounded but alive. Inside the ruined cabin, Caleb slid down the wall as 2 medics burst in. He never took his hand off Max, who lay beside him exhausted but still conscious. "Take it easy, Hayes. We've got you now," a medic assured him. He was a tall African-American man in his late 20s, Petty Officer Jonas Reeves with a reassuring voice and capable hands. Reeves applied pressure to Caleb's wounds, calling for immediate evac. The trapdoor groaned open, and Rachel and Daniel climbed out, trembling, supported by 2 operators. "You're safe now," Caleb rasped. Rachel collapsed into silent, relieved tears. Daniel squeezed Caleb's shoulder, avoiding the injury. "You saved us all." Caleb looked down at Max. "No, he's the one who saved you," he whispered. In the following weeks, Northbridge Care was exposed to the public. Silverline's entire network crumbled. The deputy sheriff behind the bombing was arrested and charged, and Max was awarded the National K9 Valor Medal. Images of the once-forgotten hero dog lying in a hospital bed next to Caleb went viral, both of them recovering, both of them survivors. The entire country fell in love with the shepherd who bore a child through the storm. Emma, now safe with her parents, was a frequent visitor. She would toddle down the hospital corridors with bags of warm, homemade cookies and stuffed animals to lend to Max. Her charming drawings, crooked houses, towering mountains, a tall man in a blue coat, a dog with a fluffy tail all adorned Caleb's room. Winter in the Blue Mountains was as cold as ever, but for the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel that cold seep into his soul. Some storms don't freeze a man. Some storms thaw him out. And some stories remind us that miracles don't always arrive as a blinding flash of light from the heavens. Sometimes they come on 4 tired paws carrying a precious child through the endless snow. Sometimes they wear the uniform of a soldier who will not surrender his heart to the darkness. And sometimes a miracle is just a moment perfectly arranged by God. Invisible silent threads that weave strangers into a single fate so a precious life might be saved. In a world besieged by storms, this story breathes a profound truth we often lose sight of. Divine grace moves through the quiet bravery of the unassuming, the unwavering devotion of the forgotten, and the simple kindness of souls who answer a desperate plea even when they don't yet hear the call. And perhaps, just perhaps, the night that promised only loss was transformed into a testament of salvation, because a higher power placed one heroic dog, one wounded child, and one resolute protector together in that solitary patch of snow. If this journey has moved your soul, I ask you to share this light so others may be reminded that no one ever truly walks their path alone. Tell us your story below, where you are from, and how you were carried through your own personal storms. For more tales of profound courage, unshakable faith, and the miracles hidden in plain sight, we hope you will subscribe. May you be blessed, kept warm, and watched over you and your family today, tomorrow, and through every winter yet to come.